What is it like to retire at age 35? What is financial independence and how do you achieve it? And is conventional retirement planning dead wrong? We'll answer these questions and more on this, the 137th episode of the DoughRoller Podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Hey, everybody. Hope you're having a great day. I've got an interesting one for you today. I have an interview for you with Mr. Todd Tresidder. I met Todd. I've actually known him for a number of years. I last saw him at the conference that I've alluded to a couple of times that I went to in New Orleans back in, I think it was September. It's only been a couple of months and I already forget. There you go. Well, anyway, Todd has a very interesting story and I think a very interesting approach to finances, retirement, and investing. And so I wanted to bring him on the show. He was kind enough to take some time out of his day so you could kind of hear his story and what he does. He is, as you'll hear, he is a blogger. That's not how he started out, of course. You'll hear that he was part of a hedge fund, actually, way back in the day. But he now runs a site called Financial Mentor. And in the past, he's offered some coaching. He's kind of moving away from that. You'll hear about it into some more sort of product-based approach to educating folks about finances. And it's an interesting discussion on a number of fronts. So I think you'll really enjoy it. So without further ado, Todd, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
So we saw each other at FinCon a few months ago and had some good conversations and even some debates about investing and retirement. So I was glad to have you on the show because I wanted to pick your brain more about this sort of thing. But of course, those listening, many of them don't know who you are. So who are you? I
always love that graphic term, pick the brain.
Yeah,
it always brings up wonderful imagery for me.
Well, that's what we're going to do.
So a little bit about Todd Tresidder. Let's see here. Well, my site is financialmentor.com, and it started kind of as a dare from my wife. I quote unquote, air quotes, if you could see me right now, retired at age 35, which if you could see me right now, I'm very gray haired and have a gray beard. I'm 53 now. So it was quite a while ago, raised a family of 4 without any real income. It was one of these things where I did something unusual and a lot of people were asking, how did you do it? But they weren't even asking the right questions. There's logical sequence and processes that you go through to build wealth. And there's a beingness or an approach to life that, cumulatively compounds not just your wealth, but your knowledge and other aspects of life. And so I just had kind of a different approach to things. And, my wife just got tired of me just giving standoffish answers of, because it was just too hard to respond. I needed like a whole basis of teaching. And so that's what the site's become, is a way of teaching a different way of approaching stuff.
All right. So you said you retired at 35. So I have a number of questions that I just need to ask about that. And if you don't want to answer any of them, that's fine. Just say, Rob, I'm not going to answer that question. So, but I'm, as a lawyer, I'm good at asking questions. So first one is.
Yeah, but as a lawyer, though, you're only supposed to ask questions that you already know the answer to, right?
People say that. That's true at trial. Either you only ask questions where you either know the answer or you don't care what the answer is. But I'm going to pretend this is a deposition, and I ask all kinds. See, that's right. So, what did you do before you retired at age 35?
I ran a hedge fund, and so ultimately I became a partner. Originally, I just began as an employee, and then I became a partner in a hedge fund. And what I did was I was one of the early pioneers of computer modeling of the financial markets. So I built databases because back then they didn't have them. I got to take you back in time. When I did this, the IBM 8088 processor and the Apple II were brand new computers. It was just as I was coming out of college.
You're old.
So computers were just kind of coming into personal computers were hitting homes, and there were no databases. So I started building these databases and started developing computerized trading systems. And I was one of the early pioneers. I mean, now they've got MIT statisticians doing this stuff, but back then that's what I was doing.
So what did you go to college?
Yeah. I went to UC Davis and UCLA. My degree is officially from UC Davis, and it's a degree in economics.
Economics. So how did an economics major learn to develop computer models to be used in a hedge fund?
Self-taught. I had a passion for it. So the backstory is I was taking an investments course in college. He was a known successful investor. He wasn't just a teacher. He had a very large real estate portfolio in the town of Davis. And he was teaching this course, and there was some charts of securities. And I looked at him and I went up to him. I said, I get what you're teaching and I get all the stuff you're saying, but it seems to me I could make money off this and know nothing about it. I could just do it mathematically. And he looked at me like I was from another planet and said, that can't be done. Nobody's ever done that. And of course, that was, all I needed to get motivated.
Yeah.
And then my dad was about the only other authority I had in investing. And I ran it by him and he said it couldn't be done. It never had been done. And so I decided I'd do it. And so I went off and started researching and developing it. And I got introduced to another guy who had kind of a similar vision after I came out of college. And he had already started a small, back then they were called private placement partnerships. They weren't called hedge funds. We didn't have sexy names for them back then. And then he had already had one started. It was very tiny. He wasn't successful at all. And when he saw the work I was doing, the research I was doing, he's like, wow. And so we teamed up and we grew the thing and ultimately retired off it.
So when you were, this is where you might not want to answer the question, but I'll ask it anyway. When you retired at age 35, how much money did you have?
I always tell people I was north of $1 million, and I leave it at that. I don't give the exact dollar amounts. I still don't to this day, but I was north of $1 million, and so I just established it as a credibility issue.
Yeah. So I take it was less than $1 billion.
Yeah. No, I lead a very normal lifestyle, and I'm not the richest guy you'll ever meet, and I don't pretend to be. There's way richer guys who've been way more successful than me. But I've led a very nice life.
Are you still retired?
Had a lot of flexibility in what I do with my time.
Are you still? I mean, I know you have the website, and we're going to talk about that. But I mean, other than that, are you still retired?
Well, it depends on. This goes into what is retirement and defining what retirement really is.
Okay, what do you go ahead, define it for us, and tell us then, based on your definition, if you're retired.
Well, let's first of all do a definition of financial independence, because in my world, retirement is nothing more than a euphemism for old age financial independence. The difference, though, with retirement is that it has a defined lifespan to it, right? Where you can amortize the assets. When you retire at 35, or again, air quotes, retire at age 35, you can't amortize the assets because the lifespan's too long. And so there's no safe amortization rate of assets over 60 plus years. It just doesn't exist mathematically. So let's start first of all with the definition of, financial independence, which is cash flow exceeds expenses, right?
Right.
And then you go so that's a very simple definition. And then you say retirement. Well, retirement is nothing more than old age financial independence. So basically you hit a point where cash flow exceeds expenses and you can be quote unquote retired. The myth is that you don't do anything of substance. Like when people think of retirement, they think of somebody sitting on a hammock on a tropical beach with a Mai Tai in their hands. And that's only meaningful. Like I enjoy doing something like that, but I only enjoy it in the context of meaningful work. I don't enjoy it as a lifestyle. So I've lived all the extremes. Like I was a workaholic. That's how I, built the business and built the wealth, is I worked really hard. And I still work hard to this day. And then I did what I call the pro leisure circuit, which is I really did nothing of substance for a period of time. I was living in Lake Tahoe. I was young. I'd go mountain biking and beach volleyball and water skiing and do all that stuff. And it's fine for a while, but I noticed something for the other people that had that lifestyle is none of them were really happy. And frankly, I was less happy then than I was back when I had goal-oriented activity in my life. And so I've really learned that, I've been through a transition of what is happiness and what creates fulfillment in life. And I guess I didn't want my life to be a story of the last great thing he did was build a hedge fund.
So what'd you do?
Well, I'm building Financial Mentor. I'm building an educational resource that can help other people find fulfilling lives and get out of the workaday humdrum if that's a goal that they happen to have.
So your website, it earns, I assume it earns income for you?
Absolutely, yeah.
And is it to a point where you can live off of that income without tapping the north of $1 million?
If I chose to now, if I did the coaching along with the passive income sources, the answer would be yes. Just in the last 2 years, it's paid my bills.
Okay.
Prior to that, it never did.
Yeah.
it was kind of a supplement. When I started Financial Mentor, it was really just kind of planned as a nice little boutique coaching business. And then as I got into it, you can't hold a good entrepreneur down. I just kind of got into it and got a bug up my rear and just kind of ran with it. And so now I've got a much bigger vision of where I want to go with Financial Mentor, which is I'm trying to position it for advanced retirement and advanced investment strategy. The next step beyond a Dave Ramsey or a Motley Fool. It's not all the traditional personal finance stuff you find on every other site. I'm providing that next step for everybody that's already been there, done that with all that basic stuff.
Right. Okay, interesting. Now, I guess we'll talk about both the advanced retirement and advanced investing concept. But before we get to that, so you're married. Do you have kids?
Yeah, 2 kids.
All right. Does your wife work outside the home? No. So where do you get your health insurance?
Oh, that sucks. I'll tell you. I love the United States of America, and our health system is, and I am not an advocate of government involvement. Normally I'm a free enterprise guy.
Yep.
And I am staunchly against our healthcare system. It's just a mess. So I pay my own health insurance. I'd use a high deductible policy. And I am fortunately, find wood to knock on. Our family's always been healthy, so it's never been a nightmare. But it's always that potential nightmare that sits out there, and it's just wrong. It shouldn't be. So nobody should build financial security for themselves and feel threatened by a health issue because our medical system is so expensive and the insurance system is so broken and unfair that it could get anybody at any point.
Well, you have a high deductible policy. Do you have a health savings account then that goes with it?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. And curious, do you have disability insurance?
No.
Why not?
I don't need it. I'm self-insured.
Okay. Very good.
Right? I mean, if you think about it, if I'm financially independent, why do I need it? It's I don't, quote unquote, don't have to work. One thing that goes into the whole happiness thing, though, that I found is meaningful work is a great contribution to happiness. And the other thing, too, that a lot of people don't talk about is living off your assets can create poverty mentality. And so I really prefer the abundance of having the income as well as the assets in the background. And so, again, this is just about kind of maximizing your happiness and fulfillment. So I work pretty hard about 8-9 months out of the year. That's my balance point. Like when I work, and then I take off 3 to 4 months a year. Like last year, I took off almost 4 months.
What'd you do when you took that time off?
Well, for 1 month, I did a big desert camping trip, and then I hiked the John Muir Trail. So it's 250 miles. It's from the base of Yosemite Valley to the peak of Mount Whitney, which is the highest peak in North America.
And do you take your family with you?
No, the kid, they're younger. They're probably going to be up for it in the future. My wife would have done it with me in a heartbeat, but somebody had to be home with the kids. What I did was I did it in the month of September so that it didn't destroy the family summer.
Yeah.
Because it's a long enough trip, it would take over the whole family summer, which isn't fair to the kids. So what I do is I really cut my workload down. I mainly produce results during the winter months when the kids are in school. And then I just kind of scrape along during the summer, and we do a lot of vacations in the summer while the kids are out of school. And then also on school breaks, like coming up for the holidays and stuff.
Right. Well, your comment that living off of assets can create a poverty mentality is an excellent I hadn't heard it phrased that way. That absolutely rings true with me. In some ways, that's not a bad thing, at least in the sense of it can cause you to maybe, really think about how you're spending money, which I think is a good thing, but it can go too far for sure. And I think I probably, even when I work, I probably, fall into that category of folks sometimes, which is kind of strange, I guess, but, interesting concept. So it sounds like you have basically a miserable life.
Yeah. I don't want to sit here and build it up like I got it all figured out or anything. I mean, I do the best I can, and I'm constantly learning and I'm constantly improving and growing. That's one of my values. That's ultimately what got me out of the hedge fund business into the business I'm in now. I reached a point in my investment knowledge where I was going to spend the rest of my life trying to figure out how to add a percentage point or two to my rich clients' portfolios. And that just wasn't a satisfying existence for me. Once I understood investing in a way that was satisfactory to me, continued research and development in that field was not what I wanted to dedicate my life to. Yeah. Whereas this is really fun. I mean, the financial mentor thing has been an amazing challenge because it not only requires me to develop, like right now I'm building out a course of instruction, which maybe we'll talk to, maybe not, but I'm having to develop all those education course development skills, which I never would have done without this business. And then like you're familiar with all the internet marketing skills required and all the copywriting skills required. And then that ties into, because ultimately it's about people. How do you connect with people? How do you craft messages that connect with people and deliver value? And it's just so much learning and growth involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about those. Let's start with advanced retirement concepts, because I know you view, and maybe you've sort of already alluded to some of this, but I know you view retirement differently than maybe other folks. And I know you've got on your site advanced retirement resource. So talk to us about that.
Well, again, I mean, you can even almost, with the way I opened it, how I reframed retirement from the get-go. It isn't like, let's start with one really popular myth, that you're supposed to work like a dog for 40 years and scrimp and save so you can build your little nest egg and then do nothing of substance for remaining 30 years while you spend it down. And that's just stupid. Somehow we bought off on this through this, Social Security being placed at 65, and that became the cutoff point and all that. And I think what's happened is the whole world's changed most remarkably. Hold on a sec, Rob. Sorry about that. I hope you have edit capability. You can cut that out.
I do, but I won't cut it out. I like people to see I like folks to see the real thing. That's okay.
So the whole world changed recently, and it's not recent. I mean, longevity's been increasing for a long time. Basically, longevity's been increasing at an average of about 1 year for every 3 years of time that elapses. And so what used to be like when Social Security was created, the average life expectancy was 65. So it's no magic that it was Social Security was placed at age 65. That was the life expectancy. So it was a zero-sum game, which is how it was always designed. It was never designed to support 30 years of leisure. And that's why it's got problems. So anyway, this whole myth that that's how you want to approach life, I think what's happened is as longevity's increased, what we've been given the opportunity to do is interject a whole new period in life. So where it used to be, life was basically a structure of birth, school, work, death, right? That would be like the 4 phases of life. And now I think there's this birth, school, work, fulfillment, death. I think we've added a 5th phase in there through increasing longevity. And so the way I separate work and fulfillment is this idea that the initial part of your career is about it's establishing your wealth. You buy your home, you get your furniture, you get the 2 cars, whatever it is, you start getting those base assets and get a base savings. And then you can enter a fulfillment stage where you don't necessarily have to amass additional assets, but you don't want to spend down what you've got. You can pursue fulfillment. You don't have to be in the aggressive career stage anymore. So it allows people to create whole second careers, like you're seeing me with Financial Mentor. Maybe it'll go huge, maybe it won't. It doesn't have to. And so there's this kind of additional phase of career that extends out. And so your assets change form at that point, because your assets no longer are designed where they have to support spending in perpetuity, but rather your assets just have to be bridges as you move from one great phase of your life to the next. And you just have to have enough to support those bridge or those phases.
Right.
Is that making sense?
It makes perfect sense as I listen to you. So here's my concern.
How about this? DoughRoller is a great example, right? You're looking at making a shift.
Yeah, but here's the thing. So maybe you can talk me off the ledge.
Okay.
So I could have supported my current lifestyle, which is not exotic by any stretch, from just DoughRoller, starting in probably 2010. But I didn't. I continued to practice law. And I continue to practice law to this day. Now it's not been full time, but I have since that time, I kid you not, Todd, have been asking myself, why am I continuing to practice law? There's something that's compelling me to keep doing this. I don't have an answer to it other than the closest I can get is fear that if I rely entirely on this crazy thing called a blog and this podcast, if I step off that ledge, that security that the practice of law gives me, I'm not sure what's going to happen. The world as we know it's going to come to an end. So, is that just stupid fear on my part? What, how is it, do I need to go see a shrink? Maybe that's the answer.
Well, if you really want coaching on it, there's a couple questions I'd ask you. First of all, do you find law satisfying?
There are aspects of it that I do, but probably not enough to keep doing it.
All right. So let me ask you this. If you had 10,000 a week of mailbox money rolling in the door, more money than you need to spend, it just keeps rolling in the door no matter what, whether you get out of bed or not, would you continue to practice law?
I would not.
Okay, there's your answer.
Well, I know there's my answer, but I've gotten that far on my own, I have to confess, although I didn't quite phrase it the way you did.
You actually gave your own answer.
But I don't know, but I'm still practicing law. I guess it's just fear, right?
Right. That's what I said. You already have your answer. Yeah. You gave it in your question, which is, it's fear of the unknown. Yeah. You have never been without that career. You spent your lifetime building that career and you're literally tossing it away. And it's hard to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's not an easy thing when you went to school for it, you trained for it, you have your identity wrapped up in it. You own this thing that Rob Berger is a lawyer, right?
Yep,
and so
absolutely.
You have this personal identity tied into it, and you're taking all that and you're removing it, and that's scary. There's an excellent book out by Stephen Pressfield called The War of Art.
I've read it.
Yeah, and so the whole concept in a nutshell, and I'm way oversimplifying the book. It's a brilliant book, so readers should go get it. But in a nutshell, the concept is simply that whenever you try to move your life forward, there's this amazing force called resistance with a capital or R, because he's deifying it, right? And it's inside of us. And it holds us back. And me as a coach, and I see it in my own life too, even though I coach on it and I work with it, I experience it myself. And it always amazes me. Anytime I move my life forward or anytime I see my clients moving their life forward, up comes this resistance. And it takes many forms.
So when you quote unquote retired at 35, were you scared? Were you, I'm throwing away this hedge fund business that I've got that's supporting my family. Were you nervous at all?
I was probably too young to be nervous. I didn't have enough knowledge of really the stupidity of what I was doing to really understand it. I didn't have good coaching. I was just myself and making it up as I went. I call that the biggest financial mistake I ever made, selling that hedge fund, because that was a cash flow monster and I literally could have just owned it free and clear. The partner was willing to just let me have it. And I could have trained a couple employees. It was all systematic investing. And so I could have trained people and gone off and had whatever life I wanted and kept the cash flow. But I just, I just really was stupid. And I didn't have the structures in my mind. What happened was I got this either or thinking process where I had to do one or the other. Like if I wanted to go off and travel and be a vagabond and live out of a backpack and do some of the dreams I wanted to live, that I couldn't have this business. And it just wasn't true, but somehow I got my thinking going in that direction. And so it caused me to choose to sell it. So at the time I was so enamored with the adventure I was heading off on that I don't really think I understood the level of mistake I was making.
Interesting. Well, you've mentioned coaching. So tell us about your coaching, what you offer people and how that works.
Well, I'm not accepting clients now, so this isn't even a promo plug because I'm transitioning the business over to info products so I can help more people. What I did was I was coaching people on how to build wealth. And the whole premise is that, I did it myself, but you don't know it until you can teach it. And so I went out and I was working with clients one-on-one I've been doing it for 15, 17 years now. And I just got better and better with the years, and I developed into a systematic process. That's what you see on the site as I'm developing out is called 7 Steps to 7 Figures. What I figured out is a systematic process to help people, no matter what point they came at me in the wealth building process, they would map into one of the steps. And each step is a standalone course and it achieves a specific outcome. And so the learning I had to go through was there was a lot of skills and personal attributes that I had that I took for granted that was a source of my success. And so I had to learn how to train those. So, like when I first started coaching, I was making the same mistake everybody else out there makes, which is everybody thinks it's just about, let me show you what I did and then you'll go do the same, right? And it doesn't work that way, right? So you got all these gurus up on stage and they're pontificating the latest strategy on XYZ on how to make money doing this or that. And that only works for a really tiny, tiny percentage of the people who happen to be just in that exact right spot for that message. And the vast majority never implement any of the learning. And there's a reason for that. And that's they have a different base set of needs. And so what I've spent the years doing is understanding what are all those different needs and where are people coming in and how do you patch it into a structured, sequential, step-by-step process that anybody can go through. And so I finally got that done. It's taken me, 15 years to figure out. I really got 7 steps figured out back about 7-8 years ago. And then now I'm just kind of building out the platform for the marketing of it and everything like that. Now that's built out, now I'm building out the courses themselves. And so that's why I shut off the coaching, is because now I'm focused on converting a course development. And that way I can give it to people that at a much better price point. When it's one-on-one coaching, by definition, it's going to be expensive because it's a high service level, high personal touch thing. When I can info product style it, then I can deliver the same knowledge at a much lower price point, and it still is a good business model.
So when will those informational products be available?
Well, the first one I'm working on is the advanced investing module, and that's one you and I talked about a little bit at FinCon. That one is the one that's the highest demand. That one is the one that is really changing lives because, as you're probably well aware, there's so many aspects to investing that cause you to live off your assets at a much lower level than what might be desirable. For example, why is it that you can only have a 3% or 4% safe withdrawal rate when the average return from investing is 7 or 8% compounded, depending on how you look at the data and how you structure the portfolio? On the face, that doesn't seem to make sense. How can a portfolio on average return higher than what a safe withdrawal rate is? And the reason for that is sequence of returns risk or volatility risk. And so taming that risk and understanding how to manage that risk can literally transform both the wealth accumulation phase as well as the wealth distribution phase of retirement. And so it's just some stuff that's not commonly understood about how you put these pieces together that I'm teaching.
So is that available now?
No, it's not.
Okay.
It was available just to my one-on-one clients. Because again, I tested everything first on my own life, and then I tested it with my one-on-one coaching clients. So I've been coaching one-on-one clients on that material I got it down to a science about 2 to 3 years ago. And I put probably since then about 30 clients through and collected testimonials and got it down. And so now I'm putting it into product form now that I can just teach it off the top of my head.
So if I heard you right, and tell me if I didn't, but you believe you have a way in which folks can withdraw more, that can safely withdraw more than 4% of their nest egg each year.
Yeah.
And so what's the figure? How much do you think if someone has
I haven't worked the data yet. That's
okay.
Part of a post I'm going to have to put out in 2015 as part of promotion for this is another guy I work with. We're going to do the research and put together the estimates. Some of it's going to have to be pro forma. It won't be exact because some of the index data and some of the other material doesn't exist back far enough to really figure it out over a meaningful time period. So I'm going to have to really kind of figure out how to put this together in a way that can stand up to scrutiny.
Right.
But what I do know is that the sequence of returns risk is the fundamental problem. The volatility is a fundamental problem. So, I mean, Rob, you have enough background in this. If you just raise your expectancy by a few percentage points, that alone would be a game changer.
Right.
Right. Because when you look at investment return, average return, net of inflation, the number's pretty low.
Right.
And so that's where your numbers are coming in. And then when you throw in the volatility and the drawdown problems, which are characterized as sequence of returns risk, that's what really kills the number overall. So if you can raise expectancy by just a few percentage points, that makes a huge difference alone. And then if you can couple that with getting the drawdown down into either low double digits or into single digits even, that changes the game entirely. Because now you've basically handled the sequence of returns risk by lowering the volatility, you can raise the drawdown rate.
Well, I'll be interested in that because, typically as you lower volatility, typically you also lower returns.
Right. That's a myth.
Well,
what that is, where that's true, Rob, is in product. In other words, you've got a risk-return trade-off that exists at the product level, and that's valid.
Yep.
Where the mistake is made is people think that's as far as it goes, and that's because the mindset that's looking at that is an asset allocation mindset, where you think that the only choice you have is to vary the product because you have to buy and hold at all times. And so when you shift out of that from a product-only focus to an investment process focus, then you can overturn the risk-reward paradigm.
So how does that work? I mean, what's the difference between an investment process, as you just described it, versus, say, your typical buy and hold asset allocation method?
Well, let's use traditional asset allocation as an example, right? Traditional asset allocation, you're looking at stocks versus bonds versus REITs versus commodities, paper commodities, that is,
yep,
and cash. And you've got these various allocations, right? You can go international and
right,
you can go small cap, large cap, value growth. You've got all these little permutations, right?
Right.
But most of it's highly correlated, and it gets more correlated with time. But anyway, that's what you work with. And your sole risk management tool is diversification. And diversification stands on the bedrock of non-correlation. Are you with me so far?
I'm completely with you. I'm not sure if everyone else is. Maybe I'll follow up after our interview in this podcast.
No.
But absolutely.
So that's the traditional viewpoint in asset allocation. There's one. So all of that is product based.
So do you ever? Let me just interrupt.
Every time you talk to your investment advisor, it's all about product. It's about this is a good investment or that's a good investment, or I recommend this or I recommend that. It's all product focused. The one place where process exists within traditional structure is rebalancing. Rebalancing is where you're allocating from the overvalued or best performing asset down to the lower one. This is nothing more, and this is going to get a little controversy, but hey, it's your podcast. Let's get some interest here. That's nothing more than valuation-based market timing. People want to call it rebalancing because the same people who advocate it say market timing doesn't work. But if you really look at it, it's valuation-based market timing. And if you look at rebalancing, it's the only place in the traditional asset allocation framework where you improve both risk and reward at the same time. Mm-hmm. That's an investment process.
Well, so it's interesting, though, because, if I understand you, you're advocating the rebalancing, right?
Absolutely,
right.
Yeah.
Because most people, though, would say
one process within traditional asset allocation that's
right.
valid.
I think most people would say, at least I would, I don't know, but is that for those folks that are just sort of your asset allocators, which I would include in that, I would include myself in that, although I do have some individual stocks, but in any event, rebalancing is part of it. I mean, I might, it is an investment process. I might not give it such a fancy term. I might just say, yeah, I rebalanced. So I guess it kind of dovetails in my mind anyway with you asset allocation without rebalancing is, to me, they just go hand in hand, although, maybe not for everybody.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
I'm saying that that's a crude form of market timing.
Yeah, it's
interesting. Is nothing more than an extremely crude form of valuation-based market timing.
It's interesting that you call it valuation-based market timing. I'll have to think about that because I look at it a little differently in this regard. And let's take commodities, for example. Commodities are down. So I have 5% in a commodities ETF. And in fact, I was looking at it just yesterday. I look at my asset allocation at the end of every month. I need to rebalance. It's low. It's lost money. So I need to sell whatever, let's say it's stocks that are up, and move some of that into commodities, right? And that's based on the valuations. Valuations have gone down for commodities. They've gone up for stocks. But I don't see it as market timing in the following respect. I have no earthly idea where commodities are going to go tomorrow, next week, next month. For all I know, they could keep going down for a long time, and I could continue to rebalance.
That's a great point you're making.
Yeah.
And so that's another myth I address, which is that market timing has to be predictive. Okay? The key point of why rebalancing works is because it has positive mathematical expectancy. So what's really happening here is that the expectancy of undervalued assets is higher than the expectancy of overvalued assets. That's why it's a valid approach. That's why it increased. Also, the other thing that's true is that undervalued assets have lower risks. They have lower volatility as well. That's why you improve both risk and return through rebalancing. So you have to understand the core source of return. That's one of the tenets I teach. I teach 10 tenets of a valid investment strategy as part of what I teach. And that's one of the core tenets is you have to be able to associate the source of return and risk reduction with the methodology employed. And so with valuation, that's what I'm doing right here is I'm explaining the source of return and risk. Now, the myth that I was going to touch on is the idea people use terms and they don't really define them and they're not clear what they are. We just have these assumptions about them. So, for example, you shared an assumption on market timing, which is that it's predictive. And one of the tenets I teach is that anything based on any forecast of the future is by definition invalid. And that's because the future can't be known. Okay. And so if you have an investment methodology that requires a forecast of the future, then it's invalid and you can't use it. And so there's different forms of market timing. There's the predictive type, which we can throw out the door, right? Because it has no validity. And then there's the type that has statistical positive expectancy, but has no forecasting capability. And that's something very different.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting because if you don't equate market timing or if you don't see market timing as being predictive, and it sounds like you kind of put market timing in two buckets, one that's predictive, as you said, we throw that out the window, and another kind that's not intended to be a forecast or predictive, then I suspect you and I see this very, very similarly, just maybe with some different terminology.
Yeah, and the terminology is surprisingly important, okay? And it has to do with, we think in terms of words. And if we play loose with terminology and we don't really get clear on what it is, what it stands for, and what's really going on, then we can really muddy up our thinking. And it's that clarity of thinking that the students have really, my students, when I teach this stuff, have really come back at me and said, wow. So I really go through and I carefully define this stuff, as you can see me doing in this podcast, right? Like I'm going through and defining retirement. I'm going through and I'm redefining market timing. I went through and I redefined what rebalancing is and how it really works. So those are important because as you go to a deeper level of understanding, I call it first layer understanding and second layer understanding. And when you go to that second layer of understanding, that's where it becomes dynamic and these pieces start fitting together. So like what I call first layer understanding and investing is just, traditional asset allocation, passive index buy and hold. And it's not that it's wrong. It's completely valid. Okay. I mean, the Bowlerheads got it right when they talked about the importance of cost reduction and all those things. That's absolutely valid and important.
Sure.
And so that's what I call first layer understanding. That's the ground floor. That's the foundation on which you grow from. And then you've got to go and take a step beyond that and say, okay, where doesn't it work? And so let's use the analogy of Newtonian physics as an example, right? Newtonian physics works great within the realm of what's visible to the eye. But at the extreme large and the extreme small, Newtonian physics falls apart. And that's where we come into things like relativity theory and quark theory and all these different things that had to solve the problems at the extremes because the data didn't support the Newtonian model. Well, it's the same thing in investing. You've got an investing model that kind of sort of works, but it fails at the extremes. And it's those extremes of data that tell us so much more. They tell us that there's another level of understanding beyond that's absolutely critical. And the reason it's critical is because that volatility cannot be ignored. That volatility is changing people's future. Remember, we talked about that earlier when we talked about retirement planning and how the sequence of returns risk literally determines how much you can spend from your portfolio. You can double your lifestyle potentially from a change of that risk. So, buy and hold apologists will tell you, oh, you got to ignore volatility, but you can't ignore volatility. It's so important mathematically that it literally defines the distribution curve of returns.
Mm-hmm. And again, does the way you address it is the rebalancing, or is there more to it?
Oh gosh, there's more to it, but it all stands on the foundation of passive index buy and hold. I start with that, pointing out what they got right, what they have as half truths, and what's the next layer of understanding, and then we build on top of it.
Well, I'll be interested.
What we do is we build layers of risk management and layers of expectancy on top of it. We stand on that foundation because that foundation is sound.
Well, I'll be interested in seeing this as you produce it in 2015, because the buy and hold folks, including the Bogleheads, would absolutely say rebalancing is absolutely part of what they teach. You can't do to say I'm going to have a low cost buy and hold portfolio of index funds, but I'm never going to rebalance. I mean, that would be totally foreign to a boglehead. What are you talking?
No, I'm agreeing with them. They're correct. And what I'm saying is there's so much more that they can do than that. We don't have to stop at that. The problem is they went through and they defined market timing as voodoo. And it's because they jumbled up the concept of market timing into, anything that involves buying or selling becomes defined as market timing. But for some reason, they redefined rebalancing as not that.
Yeah.
And yet, one of the most sound basis of statistics, that's not the right wording. One of the most sound statistical concepts is the relationship between valuation and expectancy over a 10 to 15 year time period from a portfolio of stocks. And you can look at that and you can see the data is absolutely unequivocal. It holds across all time periods. It holds across international, domestic. It's just very sound. And yet if you think about buy and hold, it's saying you've got to hold regardless of market valuation. And yet the data doesn't support that.
Well, it's interesting because for me, I take a very practical approach to these terms. So for me, market timing is making an investment decision based on what you think the market will do in the future. Now that's Rob Berger's definition. You may not find that in a textbook.
And I vehemently redefine it.
Right. And I don't. And the reason I don't is because I like where the rubber meets the road, and I want to understand my own decisions. So for example, if I rebalance my commodities fund because it's gone down by more than 5%, and let's just assume that's my trigger, right? I'm not rebalanced. My decision to buy more of the commodities fund has nothing to do with what I think the market will do tomorrow. I suppose you could say it has something to do with what I think the market will do long term, right? I mean, if I thought the commodities fund would eventually go down to zero, I probably wouldn't rebalance into it. But putting aside that kind of extreme,
stated more clearly, the only way that's going to help you is if the asset you're rebalancing toward has a higher expectancy than the asset you're pulling away from. And so the key that you want to get clear on is what are the expectancy of the assets that precedes your decision to rebalance, and what is the methodology for doing it? Does it show a positive expectancy based on historical research?
Exactly. So I suppose you could say, well, that's at some extreme market timing. But for me, it's not market timing, at least not in any meaningful sense. But I guess that's just my view on it. But going back, what give us an idea.
And what I would say is that viewpoint dangerously sets you up to miss a deeper level of understanding.
Yeah, so that's what I want to get at. So you like as a core index asset allocation.
Can I drop something in here and then we can pick up that line of questioning in a second?
Sure.
Okay, I want to drop an idea in here just to sort of set this discussion up a bit because we skipped over this. Let's ask, what is investing at the core, right? Because I'm always redefining these terms, right?
Okay.
Investing at the core is putting a capital at risk into an unknowable future. And I don't use those words lightly, right? It is literally an unknowable future. Now you think about that, and that's quite a conundrum, isn't it? How do you put capital at risk into an unknowable future and come out with a profit? Well, there's basically three approaches. Right? There's the first approach, which is, what you see in the popular media where you got all the talking heads running around there trying to predict the future, and they're telling you stock XYZ is going to, have a great future, or the market's going up or the market's going down. And so that doesn't work. And all the research is clear on it. That doesn't work. So we're going to call that predicting the future. And I'm going to relate that to an absolute return approach. And it's probably too much to go into this podcast how I do it because I have to do it carefully to make it work, okay? Then we go down to the relative return approach, okay? And we'll call that the Boglehead philosophy since you're using that term and I'm comfortable with it. I think they're probably the most preeminent or most intelligent version of the passive index asset allocation approach, and certainly John Bogle's led the charge. So you've got that philosophy. Now that philosophy is valid, okay? That works. That has a positive expectancy. The problem with it is it has a miserable risk-reward ratio from extremes. Extreme high valuations, extreme low interest rates happens to be the environment we're in now. And so that's the relative return approach. So the assumption of the first is that you can predict the future, that you can know something about the future. The assumption of the second is that absolutely nothing can be known about the future. There's nothing that can be known about the future whatsoever. Therefore, you must blindly hold through thick and thin at all points. The third approach is the approach I'm taking, and I'm coining it expectancy investing. And that approach is that you still don't know the future. The future is unknowable. However, not all outcomes have the same probability or expectancy. So if you constantly align your portfolio with the most favorable expectancies, over time it will work in your favor. And so then I take from that premise of those three possible outcomes. So you have absolute return investing, relative return investing. That's what's always existed. Those have been the two alternatives until now. And now I'm coining expectancy investing, and that's what my book will be on. And so that's going to be the third approach, which still comes from the premise you can't know anything. However, not all outcomes are the same. Mm-hmm. They don't have the same expectancy. And so your rebalancing is aligning your portfolio from a lower expectancy asset to a higher expectancy asset. And that's the only reason it's valid.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that's a fancy way of saying I rebalanced. But I guess my question then would be on the expectancy investing approach, which you're going to write about. I know but how is it different? Give us one way in which it's different. If someone has your typical asset allocation across the major classes, and they rebalance, they may, on some sort of systematic way, they have some systematic process that triggers rebalancing. Okay. Is that relative return approach, or is that an expectancy investing as you've described it?
What I point out is that rebalancing is a very crude form of an approach or an investment process that moves you towards expectancy investing, but there's other ways of going about it.
I see. And that's what your book will cover, the other ways?
Yeah. Basically, what you're doing is you're adding layers of risk management and expectancy to a traditional passive index asset allocation
Can you
portfolio.
give us one example of something that would take people beyond your typical bogleheads, buy and hold, rebalance, that would move them closer to expectancy investing, as you use that term? Give us one example that goes beyond just rebalancing.
I'm trying to think of how to do it in a way that'll come across in a podcast. I don't think I can do it off the top of my head on the podcast, Rob, because the thing about it is I have to build up the knowledge base to get to that point. That was one of the mistakes I used to make when I first started teaching this, is I didn't build the knowledge base for the understanding. And so, like, when I first started teaching this, I used to just take people to the answer, which is where you're trying to take me, give me the answer. And almost universally, everybody failed. I would teach it, I would show them the answer. And it was, again, a mistake. If I just show you how to do it, you'll go do it. No, people didn't. What I learned in teaching this is that you have to start with where they're at, which is where this conversation's been so far, which is traditional passive index asset allocation. That's where most people are at. You have to start with that, and you have to progressively build their understanding to the point that they can understand the next level answer.
Interesting.
And so anyway, I can't give you that answer off the top of my head in a way that's going to work for this interview.
Okay. Well, no worries. I was thinking about your definition of investing. It's not unlike mine. Mine, I think, I can't take any credit for originality here. It really comes from Warren Buffett. But mine is similar to yours. It's basically putting capital at risk with a reasonable belief of increasing its purchasing power over time. That's kind of how I think of investing. I don't know. At the end of the day, it's still
sure. But then you can say, well, where's that reasonable belief come from?
Sure, that's right, and it comes from a lot of sources, right? Depends on your approach. Like you said, buy and hold. Why is that? Why do you have a reasonable belief of indexing, for example? Yeah,
well, you can say, well, what's the source of return from passive index buy and hold? Like, why do I even say it's valid? It's valid because if you look, there's really three components to the return from stocks. You've got dividends plus economic growth, plus or minus change in market valuation. Right. That's the formula for return on stocks. And so the first two are pretty much cast in stone from the day you invest, right? Which is the dividends, and the economic growth is a constant. So the second component of the equation is pretty much a constant. As a matter of fact, it's really remarkable how consistent economic growth has been. And then you throw dividends. Those are set by your initial buy-in period. So if you buy in a low-valued market, you get a very tiny dividend, right? So let's just use 2% as a round number for now. And if you in a highly valued market, you get a really low dividend. In a low valued market, you get a higher dividend. Let's say 9% or 8% in an extremely undervalued market. So you can already see what goes on with that equation just from those 2 points, right?
Right.
If you're starting with, let's say, 2% real economic growth and you've got 9% dividend, you're looking at 11% before you look at the plus or minus change in market valuation on the third component. Whereas if you buy from an overvalued market, you start with 2% dividend and 2% growth, so you got 4% before you go into the third component, which is the plus or minus change in market valuation. Well, then when you go to the third component, it gets really interesting, because the third component, if you buy in an overvalued market, it's a negative number over a 10 to 15 year time horizon, and then it regresses towards the mean or regresses towards zero over 30 plus year time horizons. And that's why you always see buy and hold people talk about how you have to have a long-term time horizon, because basically what they're really saying is you have to let that third component regress to the mean before the first two can exert their positive influence and give you a positive return. And so quite opposite, when you buy in a low valued market, you get a positive return in that 10 to 15 year time horizon as before it regresses towards the mean for the 30-year time horizon. So long term, you'll see it in most books, and it's true. If you expect anything more than dividends and economic growth from a long-term buy and hold portfolio, you're a fool, because that's essentially what you're going to get, because the third component is going to regress to the mean.
Right. Interesting. Okay, so let's talk. And I know I've kind of been covering a lot of ground here, and I appreciate your
well, we've
time.
covered a lot of investing stuff. We haven't hit on the retirement planning at all.
Well, what should we hit about retirement planning? What's your take on retirement planning? How let me ask you this: do you think traditional retirement planning? I think I can already guess the answer is it hits the mark, or does it miss the mark?
What makes you think I'd take the opposite side of that one, Rob?
Because you take the opposite side of everything.
Well, again, I've walked the talk, and I've read the books, and the books didn't hold mustard to what I experienced in reality, right?
Yeah.
What I experienced in reality, and that's why I created my own retirement calculator, that ultimate retirement calculator on my site. I had that program because I couldn't use the ones in a practical way with my clients. When I look at retirement planning done right, it's about life planning, and then you embed the numbers into it. It's basically engineering numbers behind your life plan and seeing if the numbers work or not. And so I needed a calculator that allowed me to do advanced scenario analysis over people's life plans. And so that's how I designed the calculator. Most people, they approach retirement planning in pursuit of the number, right? Like, the ING commercials where they have the red letters stamped on a guy's head as he's walking around until he hits his number.
Right.
Remember those?
Sure.
That's a myth. It doesn't work that way. There is no such thing as the number. Doesn't mean that retirement planning is an exercise in futility. It's very useful, because what you can do is you can use calculators to point true north, give you a general goal of where you're heading towards or a destination. But there's no such thing as the number, because if you think about it, it's impossible to do. The inputs to the retirement plan are so many, and they're all premises of the future. They're all forecasts of the future, which, as we've already discussed, are impossible to make accurately. And this is not me being like in a retentive detail about this. These forecasts, if you're off by a percentage point or two on a couple of the numbers, it can double, triple the amount you need for retirement. It can cut it in half. I mean, the differences compounded over a lifetime are dramatic for even small changes in just a couple numbers. And so, people who approach retirement calculators, a common myth I see is they'll sit there and they'll just try to go for increasing accuracy. Like, they'll want to separate out spousal assets and, rates of return before and after retirement and all these different things. And it's just, none of it works. It's not valid in any way. The only thing really, your retirement plan boils down to the ratio of two numbers. It boils down to your savings rate as a percent of your income, right?
Okay.
And it boils down to your ROI, your rate of return on assets, minus inflation. And in the early stage of the wealth accumulation phase, it's all your savings rate as a percentage of your assets. And the later stage, once you've got wealth, it's all investment return minus inflation. Everything else is like putting a fine point to it. It's a detail, and it won't really change things.
Okay. And does your calculator help folks figure all that out?
Yeah. The calculator, it's written in JavaScript, so it's totally private. It operates in your browser. That probably doesn't mean anything to most of your viewers, but a lot of the calculators out there are data collection machines. I don't know if a lot of people know that. And so this calculator, it operates only in your browser. It's totally private. And you can do, the other reason it's done that way is you can do scenarios in it. And anytime you want to change one number, you can just change that one number. It's all on one screen right in front of you. And you can flip numbers around based on, supposing I rent that house instead of sell it. Supposing I do consulting for 5 years, how will that change my numbers? And you can just start inputting these life plan scenarios in there one at a time and see how your numbers change. And some of them are remarkably dramatic.
Wow. Okay. Well, I will leave a link in the show notes to that calculator so folks can check it out. One question I wanted to ask you before, I appreciate your time, but is you've written a number of books. You've got the 4% rule, variable annuities, pros and cons. How much money do you need to retire? These are all available on Amazon?
Yeah. The lead book is the How Much Money Do I Need to Retire?
Yeah.
Every one of these books is written based on client needs. Yeah. They're all written based on my experience of what is not being properly addressed within the marketplace.
How have these books done for you in terms of sales on Amazon?
Well, the only one that's really taken off was the How Much Money Do I Need to Retire? Okay. That's the only book I really marketed. That was my test for that whole strategy as a passive income stream. The other 4 were kind of add-ons to build out, and they're all good books. But that one's really the main one that people want to start with. It's a question that everybody confronts. How much money do I need to retire? It's not taught properly. And so what I do is I go through the traditional model, which is the asset-based approach to retirement planning. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. It's the asset-based approach to retirement planning.
Okay.
And then I go and I show how you can take a lifestyle-based approach to retirement planning. And then you can use that to transform your numbers in dramatic ways. And then I go to the third model, which is the cash flow based retirement planning approach.
Right.
And so I cover each one of those in the book, and none of them are mutually exclusive. What it is, you can imagine they're like different dimensions of a puzzle. And each approach shows a slightly different dimension. And it's through the understanding of all 3 dimensions that you can get a really firm grip on your retirement plan. So that's the lead book. That's the one I really wanted to test the waters with. And then the book coming out on expectancy investing, I think, will be another really strong book. And then the other ones are more boutique books. They're more specialty books, like the investment fraud book. If you look at my testimonials on my site, I've saved quite a few clients from investment fraud. And I have an approach to doing that where I can just sniff it out. As an attorney, you'll probably see it in there. And then the coaching book comes from my experience in coaching. It's a real rip-off industry. A lot of people don't have experience, or a lot of people are best-selling authors that have coaching programs that are just a floor of people working off manuals, and they don't really deliver value. And so I wrote a consumer's guide. It's called Don't Hire a Financial Coach, ... until after you read this book. And it's sort of a consumer's guide from inside the coaching business as to how it works and what you want to watch out for and how to select a coach that'll work for you.
Right.
So each one's just a different one. They're all really consumer oriented. It's all pro-consumer stuff.
So having written those books, and particularly the one about how much you need to retire, do you view writing books for Amazon as a viable and worthwhile way to generate passive income?
Yeah, absolutely. I like it a lot. It's revenue producing marketing. It's a great way to deliver value. I'm an avid reader because you get access to people's best thoughts organized in a cohesive, succinct fashion, all for a couple bucks. To me, it's a no-brainer way to grow and learn and explore. And so I'm walking the talk by doing the hard work of organizing some of my thoughts into books on specific topics. And so I have a whole series planned. It's called 60-Minute Financial Solutions. So they're all short books, kind of, 50 to 130 pages kind of range, where I'm just trying to nail a specific topic, because my experience in talking to my readers is that people don't want these grandiose tomes that have, 200 pages of filler for 50 pages of beef. And so I'm trying to nail very narrow, specific subjects. Like another book in there is Variable Annuities, Pros and Cons. I had so many clients getting ripped off with variable annuities and they're so complicated and so hard to explain about who they're for and who not, that I literally just sat down one day and it was more than a day. It took me about a week to write the book on it. And it's a little tiny book. It's 30 pages, but I'm laughing because it's a funny story when I finally figured out how to explain these things, because they're so convoluted and so messed up and the marketers just make a mess of them, right? And I finally figured out how to explain it in a way that totally made sense. And I was all excited. I went down and told my wife, and I said, I finally figured it out. I got it. She says, great, honey. Can you go clean the cat box?
I like her already.
That memory of that one because I wrestled with that topic so hard. My reward was cleaning the cat box.
I like her already. She didn't line it with your books, did she? No, she wouldn't have done that. So no. I appreciate your time. Before I let you go, let me ask you this. Other than your books, which of course I'll link to in the show notes, what are, I don't know, if you can narrow it down to three of your favorite books about whatever, personal finance, retirement, investing?
Well, what I'm doing, I'm building out a recommended reading list on my site. It's underneath the resources tab. And I have recommended reading by different topics. So I've got one recommended reading list on market history and bubbles, one on advanced investing strategy, one on beginner investment strategy. One, I'm going to put out an entrepreneurial.
Throw out a couple books that really spoke to you.
Well, a book I'm reading right now. How about the book I'm reading on my desk right now? It's called Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less by Greg I don't know how to pronounce his last name, McCowan. I think that's an excellent book.
The Disciplined Pursuit of Less.
My coaching going forward. It's how I've approached life, but he's really helped me formalize the thinking through the way he structured it in the book. So I think that's an excellent book.
Great. That's one I've not heard of.
Yeah, Essentialism. It's really cool. The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. So, it's kind of endemic with our life now. I don't know anybody that doesn't have more than they can do. And doesn't, we're all surrounded by more opportunity and more information and more stuff than we have time to handle. And so we've gone into this world of hyperabundance where you have to go for less, but better quality. And because if you try to take it all in, you try to take advantage of all of it, then your life is just mayhem and rushing around and it's no fun.
Right. Great. Well, I appreciate that. That's one I'll definitely check out. Well, any questions I should have asked you that I didn't? What should we have covered? I mean, we've covered a little bit of everything.
Oh gosh, we could go on forever, Rob.
I'm going to run out of space
not
on
off
my
the top of my head. No,
okay.
I think we've covered some subjects in a fun way that hopefully is going to have value for your listeners.
All right. Well, I will. I appreciate your time. I'll include links to the things we talked about in the show notes. But really appreciate it, Todd. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rob.
So as I told you, it was an interesting interview. I told you that at the top of the show. I enjoyed talking with Todd, and in the past, he and I have had some interesting conversations. It's funny when I talk to Todd, it always seems like we disagree, but as I think through the conversation, I really don't think we do. We just maybe use different terminology to get to the same place. Not sure exactly, but I always enjoy conversations with Todd. He's the kind of guy that always makes you think. And I like that. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any of course, if you have any questions for Todd, you can reach out directly to him. Again, his site is financialmentor.com. But as always, feel free to hit me up with an email. If you listened to my podcast 133, I've more or less managed to hit inbox 0. So I'm getting back to folks much quicker when you email me. Love to hear from you. dr@DoughRoller.net. Whether you've got a question, maybe you've got a topic you want me to cover, and whatever. I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me an email, dr@DoughRoller.net. Hey, until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.